just follow up. Essentially, I would go in the same direction as what Eugenio has already indicated, but in fears of being very scholastic again, I would just call attention to one thing, which is we should never lose track that the text is not talking about phenomenological propositions, but it's talking about phenomenology just as of phenomenology as of every other eidetic science. So in order for us to reflect on the question, we need to take the comparison seriously. So would anyone say that the limits of imagination prevent us from imagining a kind of triangle different from the ones we have? Or to put it another way, it doesn't sound so strange to us if we say that we are not limited by our imagination when we say that every triangle has the sum of its internal angles equal to 2r. We usually wouldn't say that maybe if we had a more powerful imagination, we could think of a triangle which is not isosceles, equilateral, or scaling. So this doesn't sound as strange to us. On the other hand, when we talk about phenomenology, we usually found this common objection that phenomenology is limited by our human imagination. So why is it that in the case of other eidetic sciences like geometry, this objection does not seem to be so strong, and in the case of phenomenology, it seems to have more strength? This is something that we might want to consider as well when we're tackling this question. That's not an answer, but that might help us towards finding one.
Thank you, Guillermo. Well, the microphone is open, even from any kind of participation. Well,
may I?
Claudio.
Yes, thank you. I think that Guillermo is right, and the main point is stressed is first of all the role of imagination within eidetic sciences in general. So if we have to find the limits of fantasy, whatever, let's call it imagination for the sake of clarity, although we all know that fantasia is not imagination, and there's many reasons to spell the difference between the two. But let us put this point aside for a moment. The second, so I guess Guillermo is right, but if we have to take seriously the point of this section, which means the specific contribution of fantasy to eidetic sciences, which is not to the validities of eidetic truths, then in this case, the point has been spelled out in the passage Eugenio read before, namely, how does fantasy contribute in an essential way to eidetic sciences as geometry? And the text says, thanks to imagination, the geometer can vary figures that has never ever perceived. So it's very important, he says, that in geometry we have collections of models, Modelsammlungen, which means that these are forms, geometrical forms, that have never ever been perceived, but can be intuited, imagined. So this is what geometry does, figuring forms that have no actual perceptual correlates, but then can be intuitively given as such. Now, there are lots of geometrical figures that has no corresponding perception. If it would be stuck to perception, we would not have those figures. So this is the point. This is what the section says. Nothing about the truth of geometry, nothing about the truth of the states of the propositions of phenomenology, but the way in which eidetic science accede to their object to be studied and spelled out, and the truth of which have to be discussed. So Russell said, if we were stuck to perception, we would only have geometry of perceptual objects. But if we do geometry, then we vary what we have and we can imagine geometrical forms that we have never perceived. These then can be studied geometrically. The same holds for phenomenology. What's the object of phenomenology? Lived experiences. But if we only get stuck to perceptually given lived experiences, the one we live, well, you see, the field of phenomenology is narrow. There are plenty of lived experiences I've never experienced. There are plenty